Welcome everybody to CBST, Congregation Beit Simchat Torah. We were founded in 1973, but we moved into this spectacular building in 2016. This is a Cass Gilbert designed building. Cass Gilbert, of course, was one of the greatest American architects of the 20th century. He designed buildings like the U.S. Supreme Court, the Woolworth Building here in New York City, and many other important historic buildings. So this is a Cass Gilbert building, which means so much to us to be in such a historic building. It has on its front Assyrian reliefs, which we in particular love. The Assyrians were the enemy of the Israelite, the Jewish people. But here in this same building, with these Assyrian reliefs, we have a thriving, dynamic, exciting Jewish community that's taking us way beyond into the future. Let's go on inside and see more. So on the door handles themselves is the phrase, Tov lahodot l'Adonai. It is essential to express gratitude to the Holy One. And the idea was that even coming into this space, we would physically have an imprint on our hands of those words. So we pull open the door, and then we enter, seeing the phrase again here, that from the beginning of CBST was used as a slogan, a motto, a bumper sticker to express CBST. Even ma'asu habonim hayta l'rosh pina. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. In the early years of CBST, we understood ourselves to be rejected by the larger society. But we also understood we're not just victims. And in fact, we rejected the idea of a victim mentality or identity. There is power in internal strength to understand that we too are created in the image of God. On the wall over my shoulder here shows the names of every single person who gave $1,800 or more to support building this space. And to reflect the values of our community, this list is in alphabetical order. If somebody donated $1,800 or $7 million, they're not indicated with any difference. They're all part of the community that made this possible. One member actually gave us a small donation every month for 6 years to achieve the $1,800 amount to be on this wall. So this wall represents our deepest values, that every contribution matters. It has to be meaningful to each person. And this verse from Exodus, from the book of Shemot, says, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, which became the motto of our building campaign, of our Mishkan Development Committee. God says, Asuli mikdash, make for me a holy place, v'shachanti b'tocham, and then I will dwell among you. It's up to us as human beings to create holiness. Then we will be able to find God. God is asking us to be the agents of creating things that are sacred and kind and beautiful and full of humanity. And then God will meet us in this partnership. So now we're in our Sheffer family lobby, which is the central meeting place. And like every New York City apartment, every space in CBST is designed for multi-use. So this space gets used sometimes to serve meals and sometimes just to hang out and schmooze. So Harvey Milk, who was the Jewish gay member of city council in Board of Supervisors in San Francisco, turned to his friend Gilbert Baker and said to Gilbert, we need a different symbol for our movement than a symbol that the Nazis used to designate our identities. Gilbert Baker had the idea to create the rainbow flag. Each color of the rainbow flag designated a value that our community embodied. It wasn't just the rainbows of human beings. It was, what are the values that we as a community embody? And let me read to you what some of those values are. So as we mark here on our sign, hot pink represents sexuality. Red represents life, orange represents healing, yellow sunlight, green nature, turquoise magic and art, blue is serenity and harmony, and violet is spirit. And he believed that we needed something to express the values of our community in this flag. Fast forward to 2011, Gilbert Baker was living in New York City, was impoverished and very sick, and he asked to speak to me. He and I had never met, but he knew I was a spiritual leader here in New York. He wasn't Jewish, but he wanted to meet with a spiritual leader. He had a sense that he was coming close to the end of his life. So I went up to Harlem. He lived in a basement apartment in Harlem, which was very full of, every single corner was full of his art making and artwork, and he was very, very, very sick. I spent the whole day with him, and he and I became very connected and very close. And I realized then in meeting him that he never made a penny over the creation of a rainbow flag. The concept, which is now on vodka bottles and on every possible piece of merchandise, Gilbert Baker, the human being who came up with the idea itself, never made a penny off of the entire concept. And I saw that he was extremely impoverished and quite ill, so I commissioned him to make 4 rainbow flags for CBST. And I asked him if he would make them as he made the one for 1978. So you'll see this flag, these 4 flags are from the exact same material as the original flag, with the dies that Gilbert Baker made by himself and then sewed together. And you can see his signature is on each one of them. It's on this color. And we hung these 4 flags at CBST when we were in our old location on poles every Friday and Saturday, had them part of our Shabbat services. When we moved to this location, I realized that having them displayed as art would preserve them better than hanging them on poles. And you could even see how hanging them has affected their little bit of their framing. And we invited a CBST member who's an artist, Richard Orient, to help us design the actual display of these 4 original Gilbert Baker rainbow flags. The other piece of value in our synagogue, and I'm now going to look at the Mezuzot, is that when we decided to move into the building, we're going to look at the Mezuzot that are on every door. We had a question. For a Jewish community, it's traditional to have a mezuzah that has selections from the Bible inside on every door. And I really debated, how do we decide what mezuzot to hang? It's so important. Do we have the children of the community make some? Do we have a different kind on every doorway? Do we have them that are ceramic or wood or metal? There's so many choices to make. And our then associate rabbi, Rachel Weiss, and I were spending hours on the computer looking at every possible mezuzah you can imagine. And there's more than you can imagine. And then we found this couple in Warsaw, Poland, a young couple, a man and a woman. The woman is an artist, the man is a business manager of the business, and they had this idea. Poland was the home to 3.5 million Jews in 1939. Only a couple 100,000 of those Jews survived. The community was completely decimated, including my family. During that time, when Jews lived in Poland, when there were 3.5 million Jews, every single home had mezuzot, every single Jewish business, every single Jewish school, every single Jewish institution. So there were millions and millions and millions of doorways that were marked by mezuzot. From 1945 to 1989, after the Nazis were defeated, Poland went under the regime of the Soviet Union, and the Iron Curtain closed Poland from the West. The Soviet Union, deeply anti-Semitic, wanted to wipe out all traces of Jewish life in all the areas of the former Soviet Union. So there were many things that were destroyed that were Jewish between 45 and 89. But after the Berlin Wall fell and the Iron Curtain came down, from 1989 to now, it's now possible to search for evidence of Jewish life in Poland. And this young couple understood that someone needed to go and look on doorways to find echoes, to find evidence, to find a reflection of the mezuzot that for sure were there. And then the artist of them had the idea of casting molds where there were evidence of mezuzot on buildings, and then creating these bronze mezuzot that would reflect that casting. The address from which the mezuzah is taken is on the side of each one. So we wrote them a letter, I have that letter somewhere, and asked them if we could buy all 36 versions of their mezuzot to hang throughout our synagogue. And of course, we then have to buy the cloth, the parchment that goes inside. We developed a very deep relationship with these folks. They're called Mipolin, M-I-P-O-L-I-N, which means from Poland. So you'll see one of these in every place. So by having these mezuzot, we're honoring the history of those of us who come from the Eastern European Jewish communities, acknowledging the Shoah, the Holocaust, which decimated and destroyed not just 6 million Jews, but wiped out the entire 1,000 years of Jewish histories in Poland. Also reflecting our values is that into some of our larger spaces, and the sanctuary space in particular, we have 2 mezuzot in each place. This is also made by the same company, Mipolin, but this one has Braille on it, so that somebody who is blind could actually read from this. And it's at a lower level, as we do in all of our larger spaces and sanctuary spaces, so that somebody in a wheelchair or children can reach the mezuzah to kiss it, as that's one of the traditional things that people do. So we wanted to make sure it's accessible. So in any of the larger sanctuary spaces or into our main space, we always have the 2 mezuzot. One of the things that we wanted very much in designing this new, very modern space is to also honor where CBST has come and what our spaces were before, and not to just eliminate any of our history, our physical history. So above the door to our main sanctuary, the Wine Family Sanctuary, are these images of the Lions of Judah, which are another traditionally Jewish symbol, which was designed by CBST member Walter Schwartz many, many years ago for our Bethune Street location, our original Bethune Street location. And it was above the ark there, and it has the 2 Lions of Judah on either side of the 10 Commandments, which is as traditional as you could get. Many, many synagogues have that. However, in our case, the 2 lion couples are both male and both female. So again, this is a kind of a subtle twist that you have to look carefully to see that the lions, we're taking a traditional symbol, but we're rooting it in our contemporary universe right now. Again, these doorknobs are similar, smaller, but similar to the ones on the outside coming into the space, in that they have engraved in a way that is embodied when you try and open the door, the phrase from the Psalm for Shabbat, Tov lahodot l'Adonai. It is essential to give thanks to the one above. This is another way that we honor our history while we understand we're not creating a museum. This is a live, real synagogue of Jews today living out the greatest nightmare of the Nazi people, right? That we survived and we are continuing to grow and thrive. So in the 70s and early 80s, CBST, this is a Sefer Torah from Czechoslovakia. It was written in 1800. And CBST applied to become a home for one of these Sifrei Torah. This is not in condition to read from on a regular basis on Shabbat morning, but we keep it in this very special case to honor it, to make sure it's part of the sanctuary, part of the holy community, even if it's no longer possible to read from it for ritual purposes, but we keep it here as a sign of respect, and also knowing the community it's from is entirely destroyed. And we, by having it at CBST, are saying, Mir Zayin Da, we are still here, and we honor and mourn and take care of this Sefer Torah out of that kind of deep respect. So here you see all the prayer books that we use in the sanctuary and the prayer shawls, the talitot. And now you're coming into this jewel of our space, which is our CBST sanctuary. And again, starting right away on the ark, we have the line from Tehillim, from Psalms, Tov lahodot ladonai. So it becomes a through theme. It's essential to give thanks. So this pattern for the parochet, which is what we call the cloth which covers the ark in which the Sifrei Torah are kept, is designed based on a Sephardic design of a synagogue in Spain. And again, this is now honoring and uplifting and amplifying the traditions of the Jewish people, which are not Ashkenazic and not Eastern European, but rather Sephardic. So if you pull back, you might be able to see in this there's a menorah. Sometimes you can only see it when you're farther back. And then it's designed to look like this very Sephardic design, but placed here so that we're honoring the Sephardic traditions of the Jewish people as well. And in here we keep our Sifrei Torah, the Torah scrolls that have this very honored position, and with all of the crowns that are traditional. Silver is traditional in Jewish ritual adornment. So we're very proud that we're able to have, before this building, we were never able to have all of these Sifrei Torah in one place. When we did the capital campaign for this building, we started it off in the home of Haimi Curiel many years ago, and I handed to everybody the night that we kicked off the campaign a piece of parchment paper with the words that were in the foyer coming in, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Make for me something, a holy place, and I, God, will be with you. And I said this was going to be our motto, our aspirational verse, to understand that we're going to build something holy and sacred together. And I asked everybody to keep that piece of paper on their refrigerators or in their pockets for the entire length of our capital campaign. And then, on April 3rd, 2016, when we moved from Bethune Street to 130 West 30th Street, where we are right now, we did a ritual and at our old location and had everybody take those pieces of paper and write a blessing for the new space on it. And we collected them, and then we had a parade from 57 Bethune Street to 130 West 30th Street with hundreds and hundreds of congregants walking under our rainbow chuppah. And it's traditional for Jews, when you consecrate a new synagogue, you take the Sifrei Torah out of the old one, and that changes it from a holy space to just a regular space, so to speak. And we paraded those 5 Sifrei Torah from Bethune Street, about a mile and a half here to 30th Street, with hundreds of congregants holding the Sifrei Torah and passing it, so as many people as possible could be a part of this parade, this march, this procession from our old location. We stopped at the church we had started in, and the church in which we had Friday night services for 18 years, and the chorus and the priest from that church came outside and blessed us and sang a song as we continued our processional to arrive here. When we arrived here, there were thousands of people in the street. The chorus was singing, every elected official, many rabbis, LGBT leaders, and we could only take a few people into the space because of the size, of course. And so a few of our board of directors and some of the people most connected to the project came inside with all of those pieces of paper that on one side said, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, make for me a holy place and I'll be with you. And the other side of those pieces of paper had the blessings of everybody in the synagogue for what the future of CBST should be. And we marched in here, took that bag of blessings. And this, I had asked the architect to not close up this cabinet. And now this cabinet, squeezed back here, has all of our ritual objects. But underneath this shelf, we placed into the foundation of the building all of those pieces of paper with all of those blessings on April 3rd, 2016. We then closed it up, and it now sits there, hopefully blessing us every day. The other thing we did that day is, some years ago, in the height of AIDS, I came to CBST in 1992, and we were having deaths and illness from AIDS constantly. CBST lost 40% of our membership to AIDS. One Friday night, I saw in the back of the sanctuary, Irving Cooperberg yelling at Rob Cooper. This was probably in 1992 or in early 1993. Why was he yelling at Rob Cooper during the service? Rob had AIDS and had become emaciated, as many, many people who had AIDS became. And we only had metal folding chairs to sit on. And if you would sit on a metal folding chair and you were that emaciated, your zits bones would really hurt. It was very uncomfortable. So that Friday night, Rob came to services wearing a long mink coat. Okay, it was different times. And that mink coat protected his butt from the cold and harsh metal chair. And Irving said to him, Rob, not everybody can afford to have a mink coat or other things to protect them from these metal chairs. You have to put into your will the money that we could buy cushioned chairs for everybody at CBST. Rob died a few months later, and indeed, in his will, he left money for CBST to buy cushioned chairs. We left most of them when we moved because we had designed these new beautiful pews, but we carried one of those chairs with us on April 3rd, 2016, so that we would always remember the impact of AIDS and people like Rob Cooper and Irving Cooperberg. And that blue chair is up in the balcony. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it from here, but it's up in the balcony in that second row. And every Friday night when I lead services, I look up there to remember it and the deep and profound lessons I learned from that period of AIDS. This is our memorial wall for everyone from the synagogue, members from the synagogue who have died. And we carry with us these different verses that were on the memorial wall in Bethune Street. One from the book of Isaiah, I will give them in my house and within my walls, Yad Vashem, a monument and a name that is even greater than children. I will give them an everlasting name which shall not perish. Those who came before me at CBST in that first decade, in the 80s of AIDS, had the incredible Jewish knowledge and spiritual depth to use this quote to try and bring comfort to the community. And this quote is often used by Jews to talk about the Holocaust, but it was genius of them to use this quote to talk about AIDS, to comfort people who, by and large, these men by and large did not have children, although some did, to say that God will remember them forever, even though they might not have children. The synagogue also, in this space, reflects our values about social justice in terms of accessibility. We built a T-coil system underneath the floor, which makes it possible for somebody who is hard of hearing to be able to have their own personal hearing aids will automatically hook into the T-coil system. People don't have to ask for special headsets. There isn't anything which will distinguish them or make them stand out. They will immediately get connected to the T-coil system, which is underneath the floor for this level and for the balcony level. We've also made sure that the sight lines in a space that's very intimate is as good as possible for every person, understanding that we have some structural pillars here that cannot move. And we also make sure that for wheelchair accessibility and any mobility issues, the space on this first floor is entirely wheelchair accessible, and we have an elevator to take people either up to the third floor mezzanine or downstairs as well. And you'll now see our tech system upstairs. And we have now fantastic screens and monitors so that we can now live stream. And we often, on Friday nights or for our major services, have hundreds of people live streaming and watching our services from all over the world. So we've really invested in the technology to make sure that that works as well as possible, the technology and the human skills. So our architect found a woodworker in Vermont who designed all the wood that you'll see around this space. And we really wanted the space to be warm and inviting, and wood is obviously an important technique, important media to make that happen. So he designed the wood that's used here for the cover, for the ark closing, and we'll see more downstairs so that there's a connection between our chapel downstairs and our main sanctuary here. The other piece that was essential to CBST was making sure that this space worked well musically. And so our architect hired an acoustician, also another new word that I learned, and a company whose specialty was designing space for voice and for music. And so the space here and that firm designed with our architect the elements to make this an acoustically alive space that works beautifully for both spoken voice and for music. So the space isn't too dry, and it is also just incredibly beautiful to hear music and to be heard in this space. And a piece of it is this angling out of these walls with these ridges helps with the sound, so there's no flat space for the sound to just bounce off of. My one concern when I saw this space, when the architect initially brought me here when we were deciding whether or not to purchase it, is that the space that we understood this was going to be the sanctuary didn't have any windows to the outside. The only architectural requirement that exists in Judaism about a synagogue is that it has to have windows. It has to be able to be connected to the outside world. And we understand from that we can never just be cloistered off in the way that a cloistered religious tradition would be, but rather always be connected to the outside world. So the architects came up with this solution to punch out this wall and to put in all these skylights so that the natural light can come in. And it turns out to be spectacularly beautiful. As the sun goes across during the day, we see the sense of the shadows change as the sun changes and travels across the sky. Today is a cloudy day, so we don't see it as much, but it's become a very, very precious part of this sanctuary, are these skylights which allow for natural light to come in. And by the architect's creativity, by punching this wall back, we make that possible. Stephen Cassell, our architect from ARO, his company, likes to say, we're the only client who ever asked him to integrate a Walt Whitman poem into a staircase. And so here it is. Walt Whitman, the gay poet of New York, of the United States, the genius that he was in the 1800s, wrote a poem that is very beloved to CBST and in our Siddur. And the poem itself says, I hear and behold God in every object. Why should I wish to see God better than this day? I see something of God each hour of the 24, and each moment then. In the faces of men and women I see God, and in my own face in the glass. I find letters from God dropped in the street, and every one is signed by God's name. And I leave them where they are, for I know that wheresoe'er I go, others will punctually come forever and ever. So throughout the synagogue, we have placed hidden little verses from this poem to indicate exactly what Whitman was talking about, that signs from God are dropped wherever they are, and it's up to us to see them. So you'll see right here in this stair, one line from the poem, I see something of God each hour of the 24. This room is our social hall, our classroom, our overflow space for services. We use this, as every space at CBST, for multi-use. It is named for Evan Wolfson. It's called the Evan Wolfson Community Room by a third-party donor who wanted to honor Evan Wolfson, who is a member of our community and the architect of marriage equality here in the United States. And we had a beautiful celebration of him and his work, and so we love having this room named for him. And the stairs here were designed to be part of the room, and they end up being places where people socialize as well as eat lunch if we have a big crowd. And it's not just the function of moving people up and down, but it really becomes part of the space itself. This is our smaller chapel. It seats about 75, and I've used it, and the community uses it for life cycle events for a smaller number or for smaller services, for board meetings, for children's classrooms, for children's services. So again, used in so many different ways. This space, like the sanctuary, was done with the architect using the acoustician to make sure that sound and music is at its peak performance here in these spaces. And this space likewise has the same woodworker designed this wood. Again, it's an echo of the wood in its aesthetic from upstairs and the ark. But in this case, this twisted wood also evokes a talit, a prayer shawl. And it creates the space of the where the aron is, where the ark is that holds the Sifrei Torah, and from where we lead services when services are led. This ark is a celebration of and reminds us of the New York Jewish community, which is an immigrant Jewish community. This ark cover was from 1922 for a Reform synagogue in the Bronx. And it was designed to celebrate the then 20th anniversary of its cantor. And you see a lot of musical themes in this ark. This is a lyre. You can see that lyre as in the musical instrument, not the musical instrument. And the phrase that's used on this ark from 1922 is from the same psalm for Shabbat that's quoted on the door handles and on the ark upstairs. It says, Tov lahodot l'Adonai, it is essential to give thanks to the Holy One, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, and to sing and to create music to celebrate the God's name on high. So in the late 1970s, this synagogue in the Bronx closed. And there was a small notice in the New York Times that said the synagogue was closing. A CBST member who had grown up in that synagogue heard that they were going to be throwing away objects that they didn't need anymore. They were merging with a synagogue in Westchester, and they didn't need this ark opening anymore. He borrowed somebody's car, drove up to the Bronx, asked if he could take this ark cover, and he drove it down to Bethune Street, where CBST was then meeting. And it hung on the wall in Bethune Street by our memorial boards for all of those years. When we moved here, it was so important to me that these ark doors would once again become useful and actually used as ark doors. So we had them cleaned up, and these ark doors now is the ark for our Curial Chapel ark. And they built a beautiful, the architects built a beautiful ark that would go into the wall, so it's flat to the wall. And now you can see this ark opens up with the Sifrei Torah down here and makes this space into a holy space that can be used for services. When it's not being used, we close everything up out of respect for the Torahs. Okay. So this closes beautifully like this. And above the ark itself is the Ner Tamid, which is made from some of the same materials that make the ark itself. AIDS, of course, is a significant piece of the story of CBST's journey. 40% of our members died from AIDS between 1981 and 1997, when there was a cocktail of drugs that made it possible to live with AIDS. So that during that 16, 17 years, it was a death sentence to receive a diagnosis of AIDS. So when I first came to CBST in 1992, it was the height of AIDS. And I don't even remember, 3-4 funerals the first month I was rabbi here, including the president of the synagogue. I started on August 1st in 92, and on September 1st, I did his Mel Rosen's funeral. Among the people I got to know so well that first year because of AIDS was one, Bill Hibsher, whose partner was dying from AIDS, Bill Johnson. And Bill asked me to come over to meet with Bill Johnson, who I did in his apartment, got to know him, and then ultimately, sadly, did his funeral. Bill Hibsher and Bill Johnson were best friends with Jeffrey Karpels and Richard Orient. And couple of years later, Jeffrey died also from AIDS, and I did his funeral as well. And then, a little time after that, Bill and Richard came to meet with me to tell me that the two of them had fallen in love with each other and were now together. And they've now been together for 29 years. And when they dedicated this room, Bill and Richard have dedicated the new room in memory of both of their late partners, Bill Johnson, William Johnson, and Jeffrey. So I find this room so moving because it both expresses, in ways that words really are not adequate, the enormous loss of leadership, of friendship, of lovers, of partners, and then how people do it is continue creating life in the face of all that death. And Bill Hipsher then went on to become the chair of our Mishkan Development Committee, and more than any other one person is responsible for the creation of the process and for the fundraising that made it possible and for the vision and the perseverance to make it possible for CBST to have a home of our own. And that's where we are now. This room would not be remarkable in any other synagogue in the world. For CBST, it's a miracle. When we moved into this space, one of the things we wanted was space to have children's education. This is a children's playroom, classroom. For us, it represents so much hope in the future, completely something that the founders of CBST in 1973 could never have imagined. A Hebrew school, a training program for young people, children of our members coming to CBST looking to learn about Jewish life. So unremarkable in any other synagogue in the world, completely a miracle at CBST. This is the second of our AIDS quilts. The first AIDS quilt that CBST made was given to the Names Project to be displayed in Washington, D.C. on the National Mall with the hundreds of thousands of other AIDS quilts that exist. This is our second one, which we keep hanging here. Again, we don't want to live in history, but we don't want to forget where we've come from so that we always are honoring our past as we build towards the future. And this is our way to honor that part of our past. When I met with Gilbert Baker that day back in 2011, his project at that time was making and painting maps. He was obsessed with maps, and he created all different kinds of art forms using maps, and I just fell in love with them. And some years later, Gilbert gifted me 3 of his maps that he thought would be meaningful to me. And you'll notice the topography is quite precise, and there's glitter throughout because everything Gilbert Baker did was with glitter. So he gave these 3 to me as a gift because he thought these 3 would be meaningful to me in terms of what they signified. So this is, of course, the region of Israel. This is their Cyprus. This is the Mediterranean. And here's Israel here, right here. This is New York City, Manhattan, obviously. And this is the world. And he wanted me to have these 3. So I had them framed by Richard Orient, and then I gave them as a gift to CBST. So it's another reflection of Gilbert Baker's great genius as an artist and an important artist in our universe, and another way to honor the great art that he created. So these are photos which show some of the construction of the space. And these are some of the early years when things were just getting destroyed and then built. So this is the mezzanine where my office is and the other rabbinical offices are. And this was you could see our leaving our old space on April 3rd, 2016, in this processional with the klezmer band and carrying all the Torahs with the rainbow chuppah and carrying the Torahs underneath. And you can see and every block we changed carriers so as many people as possible could participate, and hundreds did. More construction sites. So you can see the stairs being installed down to Wolfson. This is the wall in the sanctuary that's cantilevered out. And this is actually the church that we were at for many years, which we stopped, and the priest from the church and the chorus from the church came out to offer us blessings and to sing to us as we moved from Bethune Street to our current location. And to end the ritual, we had all these rabbis throughout the city sounding the shofar. It was quite spectacular. We're now in the famous bathroom. One of the things that we wanted in thinking about our space is to have a place that would really respect all different gender identities, sexual orientation, and create a bathroom space that was safe for everybody and, of course, aesthetically pleasing. The architect had the idea as well of making sure that we used images from our history so that, again, there would be a link between this very new, very modern space to who CBST has been in the past, so that everybody, children, newcomers, would learn about CBST when they went to the bathroom. So the architect had this idea of creating wallpaper that used images from the CBST book written by Rabbi Ayelet Cohen for our 40th anniversary to show the history of CBST so that it could be around us and part of us in all different ways. Here we have homosexual temple holds rights on the west side. So a newspaper article from the New York Times which talked about CBST and the identity of CBST then by the outside world. This shows a photograph of the same banner, the Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, with a banner that has a zipper that says the gay synagogue. So when the synagogue marched in the gay pride march, it would say the gay synagogue. But when it marched in other parades, like to save Soviet Jewry or about Israel, it unzipped the line that said the gay synagogue, and it only had the name of the synagogue. That kind of history, you can't just say. You have to see these two images to really get it. But when we wanted to build this building, it was illegal in New York City to have a bathroom that did not designate gender if the bathroom had more than one stall. And we wanted to build a multi-stall bathroom that was not limited to one gender, and to do it in such a way that would be very respectful. But we had to write to the buildings department to get a variance on the law that required bathrooms to be separated by gender. And here's quoting from the letter that I wrote to the buildings department to get that variance. Dear friends, I am the senior rabbi at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, a leading voice in Judaism and in the movement to secure basic civil rights for LGBTQ people everywhere. I am submitting this letter in support of our congregation's request for approval of restroom accommodation in regard to our construction site. In building a new home, we are creating a religious, spiritual, and community space that reflects our congregation's diversity of gender identity and sexual orientation. This is my favorite part. The construction of all gender and gender-neutral restrooms reflects our congregation's religious belief in creating an inclusive and safe home for our community. We ask that the department approve for plans submitted herewith. That was submitted in 2012, and we received the approval in October of 2012. This is the approval from the buildings department. In consideration of the proposed synagogue for the LGBT community, where the conventional definition of gender is no longer sufficient, the request for a variance from PC 403-2 or .2 for the requirement of separate toilet and lavatory facilities to be located separately for each sex and to provide a single gender-neutral arrangement is hereby approved with conditions. And so we were able to build this space. And each stall was given different colors. It's not exactly rainbow, but it evokes the concept of multicolored, multi-use. And the idea is that each stall is a completely discrete unit. People can check themselves in the mirror. There's total privacy. There's no opening on the bottom or the top like a lot of multi-stall facilities are, to make sure people experience total privacy. So outside of each bathroom, we put the traditional blessing that's said by Jews when you leave the bathroom to express gratitude that our bodies actually work. Because guess what? If our bodies didn't work, if we weren't able to go to the bathroom, we would die. So it's traditional in Judaism that this prayer is said when you leave the bathroom. So we've placed this outside of each bathroom throughout the building. And this space, this was written when we moved in 2016. And in many ways, we're way beyond this language, but it shows we're trying to teach people, use the opportunity to keep teaching people to keep reaching for our highest selves. A few years ago, in response to the vicious anti-immigrant rhetoric that was being promoted at the highest levels of this country, CBST did a deep dive and a deep self-study about how we could be most effective in supporting immigrants in the United States. It was started by CBST member Marcia Melnick, and then a group I created did a study about what's happening in New York City and how could CBST be a healthy and effective and important part of the ecosystems in New York that support immigrants. And we created the ARC Immigration Clinic at CBST to support immigrants in their process to be granted asylum. The clinic now has gone way beyond that and helps with green cards and work visas and all different kinds of significant supports to immigrants. But the focus really has been on asylum seekers and supporting asylum seekers. And because of who we are over the course of time, and we're very integrated into the whole system here in New York City, our clinic has become well known for 75% for helping LGBT asylum seekers and or HIV positive asylum seekers. And we now have a very robust clinic that the legal element is supervised by CBST board member Noemi Maslia right now. We have a staff led by Noah Habib, social work interns, law students who intern here as well, all about supporting immigrants in this process to achieve asylum. And every butterfly that's on the wall marks another asylum seeker who has been granted asylum to stay here in the United States because of the work of CBST's immigration clinic. One of the great challenges we had in considering this space and then ultimately buying it and designing it was how to make enough room for all of the things that we wanted, knowing that the footprint was smaller than we had dreamed we were going to be able to afford. We couldn't afford something bigger. So the architects came up with this idea of creating a mezzanine and creating 2 floors of offices. And this was a very creative solution to a very limited space. So this office suite, the Anna and Siegfried Spitz Administrative Suite, houses all of our administrative offices and is right on the street level. One of the big differences between this space and our Bethune space is that we actually have windows. For 24 years, I was in an office in Bethune Street with 0 windows and no access to the outside. So this is a huge transformation that we get to see what's happening on the outside. And this space, as I said, houses all of our administrative folks. So we had many things to balance in creating the design and moving in here. And the most significant one was, of course, we couldn't afford something as big as we wanted. So the creativity that the architects showed in every step of the way is demonstrated in our space use now. So this is the upper level of that mezzanine that I described downstairs that was created to have 2 levels of office space and to make sure that there was room for everybody we had. That was 2016, and so we created this space that was connected to the outside, which again, in our previous location, there were no windows. And we created these glass walls, so even any offices that are inside the glass wall has access to those, to the outside light. And we wanted to name offices by function, not by people, that also expresses our values. So we have the social justice office, the music office, and 2 Rabbi studies. And this space then becomes the space in which this kind of work can happen without actually taking as much space as might have been in a different location.